The restaurant was the kind of place where conversations stayed low and confidence wore tailored suits. Crystal glasses caught the light. Plates arrived like artwork. Power sat comfortably at every table. Old power inherited power, power that had never been questioned. At a quiet corner table sat a black woman dining alone. She wasn't dressed to impress. No loud labels, no need to announce herself. Her posture was calm, her movements precise, the kind of discipline learned over years of being watched, judged, and underestimated. She read the room the way some people read contracts, carefully, deliberately, already knowing where the danger hides. Across the room, laughter cut through the elegance. A wealthy teenage boy leaned back in his chair, bored, restless, entitled. His mother watched him the way you watch something you own, amused, indulgent, proud. The world had always made space for them. Tonight was no different. Until it was. The boy flicked his wrist. Food sailed through the air, not accidental, not careless. Intentional, a joke in his mind, a performance for his mother. It landed where it was meant to land, on the black woman's table, splattering humiliation across linen meant for dignity. For half a second, no one breathed. Then his mother laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an apologetic one. A real laugh, the kind that says this is funny because nothing will happen to us. The kind that teaches a child exactly who he's allowed to hurt. Around them, eyes dropped. Forks froze midair. Some diners pretended not to see. Others saw everything and chose silence. The staff hesitated, caught between right and reputation. Power once again made the rules. The woman looked down at the mess on her table. She didn't shout. She didn't stand. She didn't ask for help. Instead, she slowly lifted her gaze. In her eyes was not anger, but memory. Years of restraint. Years of swallowing moments like this because reacting always came with a cost. Years of being told to stay calm, stay quiet, stay grateful just to be allowed in the room. Everyone assumed the same thing now. That she would clean it up. That she would leave. That this moment would belong to them. They had no idea who they were laughing at. They had no idea what kind of power sat quietly across the room. What they didn't know would change everything. Her name was Nia Carter, though very few people in that restaurant knew it, and none of them knew what it meant. To most eyes, she was just another guest dining alone. A black woman in her late 30s, composed, reserved, easy to overlook if you were trained to only notice loud confidence and familiar faces. She had chosen this restaurant deliberately, not for luxury but for neutrality. A place where business deals were whispered, not announced, where power didn't need to raise its voice. Nia had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than noise. She hadn't grown up in rooms like this. Her childhood was built on discipline and delayed gratification. Her mother worked 2 jobs and still found time to teach her how to walk with her head high, even when the world tried to push it down. Her father used to say, "They'll test you harder because you look like you shouldn't win." He wasn't bitter when he said it. He was preparing her. And he was right. Nia had climbed every rung the hard way. Education, risk, failure, resilience. She built her company from a borrowed desk and an idea no one wanted to fund. She'd sat in meetings where people assumed she was the assistant. She'd watched investors smile politely while dismissing her vision, only to call her years later when the numbers spoke louder than their bias. Success didn't make her immune to moments like tonight. It just made her better at surviving them. This dinner wasn't a celebration, it was a pause. Tomorrow she would finalize a corporate acquisition that would impact thousands of employees and shift an entire industry. Tonight was the calm before weighty decisions. She wanted quiet, she wanted clarity. What she got was a reminder. Across the room sat the Hallstrom family, a name that carried weight in financial circles. Old money, generational wealth, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. The father, Richard Hallstrom, hadn't arrived yet, but his presence was felt anyway. People like him didn't need to enter a room loudly. The room adjusted in advance. His wife, Elaine, wore entitlement like perfume. Perfect posture, effortless condescension, a woman who had never been told no in a way that mattered. Her son, Tyler, was a reflection of that world, raised to believe comfort was a right and consequences were optional. Elaine watched the room the way a monarch watches subjects. She noticed who mattered. She ignored who didn't. And when she laughed at her son's cruelty, it wasn't because she found the act clever, it was because she believed the target was irrelevant. That belief was the real wound. Around them, the restaurant operated on unspoken rules. Staff moved carefully, trained to protect the establishment's reputation before their own instincts. Managers read body language like stock prices, who to appease, who to pacify, who to quietly dismiss. When the food landed on Nia's table, those rules activated instantly. A waiter took one step forward, then stopped. A manager glanced at the Hallstrom table, then away. A couple nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks but said nothing. Nia noticed all of it. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear but fatigue. The kind that comes from realizing that even at the height of your achievements, some people will still test whether you belong. She had faced boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. She had faced regulators who questioned her authority twice as hard. But this casual cruelty wrapped in laughter, hit an older place. She thought of every time she'd been told to let it go. Every time she'd been praised for being so professional. Every time dignity was expected only from her. Nia wasn't angry at the boy. Boys learned what they were taught. She was watching the adults. Elaine didn't apologize. She didn't correct her son. She didn't even look embarrassed. She smiled, satisfied, secure in the invisible shield her name provided. That shield had protected her for decades. But shields crack when they collide with truth. Nia took a slow breath. She folded her napkin carefully, placed it beside the plate, and sat still. She wasn't deciding if she would respond. She was deciding how. Because this moment wasn't just about disrespect. It was about what happens when power assumes it's untouchable, about what the room allows, about whether silence would once again be mistaken for weakness. The world around her expected one outcome. Nia Carter was about to choose another. Nia did not move right away. That alone unsettled the room. People expected a reaction, an outburst, a complaint, an embarrassed retreat. That was the script they knew. When disrespect landed on someone like her, the ending was usually predictable. Apologies were optional. Accountability was rare. But Nia stayed still, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her breathing slow and deliberate. She looked once more at the food staining the white linen, then lifted her eyes, not to the boy, but to his mother. Elaine Hallstrom was still smiling. It was the smile of someone who had never been challenged in public. A woman whose wealth insulated her from consequences, whose social status rewrote rules in real time. Her eyes carried mild curiosity now, as if she were waiting to see what kind of inconvenience this would become. Nia spoke quietly. "Was that meant for me?" The question wasn't sharp, it wasn't emotional, it was precise. Elaine blinked, surprised, not by the question itself, but by the confidence behind it. She glanced at her son, then back at Nia, lips curling with amusement. "Oh, relax," she said. "He's just having fun." Fun. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Fun meant harmless. Fun meant forgivable. Fun meant no apology was required. Nia nodded once, as if acknowledging a statement in a meeting. "Your son threw food at my table," she replied evenly. "That's not fun, that's disrespect." Tyler laughed, a short, dismissive sound emboldened by his mother's tone. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes scanning Nia without care. "It was an accident," he said, though his grin betrayed him. Elaine waved a hand. "Exactly, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." Around them, the room strained to hear without appearing to listen. Nearby diners pretended to focus on their meals. A server stood frozen a few steps away, eyes darting between tables, calculating risk. Nia felt the weight of every gaze, even the ones that refused to meet hers. She turned slightly, addressing both mother and son now. "An accident comes with an apology." Elaine's smile tightened. "Well," she said, "if you're that sensitive, I suppose I'm sorry you feel offended." There it was. The kind of apology designed to absolve without admitting fault. The kind that shifted responsibility back onto the injured party. The kind Nia had heard too many times in her life. She exhaled slowly. "I'm not sensitive," Nia said. "I'm clear." That word landed differently. Elaine straightened in her chair. Tyler's grin faded just enough to register annoyance. He wasn't used to adults speaking to him like this, measured, unafraid, unimpressed. Before either could respond, a restaurant manager approached. He wore the practiced expression of someone trained to smooth problems over quietly. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, though his eyes lingered on Nia more than the Hallstroms. Elaine didn't hesitate. "Your guest is causing a scene," she said lightly. "We're trying to enjoy our dinner." Nia looked at the manager, then back at Elaine. "I asked for accountability," she said. "That's not a scene." The manager hesitated. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking again toward Elaine's table, recognizing the name, the status, the potential fallout. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we can move you to another table." "Move you?" "Not address the behavior, not correct the misconduct, just relocate the discomfort out of sight." Nia felt something settle inside her then, not anger, but resolve. "No," she said simply, "I'm not the one who needs to move." Silence spread. Elaine scoffed. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Some people are always looking for attention." That sentence cut deeper than the food had, because it carried a history, because it echoed every time a black woman spoke up and was labeled difficult, dramatic, aggressive, because it relied on the room to agree without saying so. Nia looked around. She saw a young couple pretending to study their menus, tension visible in their shoulders. She saw an older man watching with concern, then lowering his gaze when Nia met his eyes. She saw the server swallow hard, wanting to intervene but knowing the cost. This wasn't just about her anymore. Nia turned back to Elaine. "You're teaching your son that cruelty is entertainment," she said calmly. "That power means never having to apologize. That lesson will follow him longer than you think." Elaine's face flushed. "Do not tell me how to raise my child." Tyler laughed again, louder this time. "You don't even know who we are." That was the moment. Not because of the words, but because of the certainty behind them. The belief that identity alone granted immunity, that names and money could erase consequences before they formed. Nia studied the boy for a long second. She saw immaturity masked as confidence. She saw a future shaped by unchecked behavior. She saw a system that had failed him by never saying no. "You're right," she said. "I don't know you." Then she added softly, "But I know this behavior." Elaine pushed her chair back slightly, irritation now visible. "Manager," she said sharply, "handle this." The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Nia, "perhaps it would be best if—" Nia raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to pause him. "I will not be asked to leave because someone else chose to humiliate me," she said. "If that's your policy, say it clearly." The manager froze. He hadn't expected that. Policies were meant to stay vague, flexible, deniable. "I didn't say that," he replied quickly. "Then address what happened," Nia said. Elaine stood now, her composure cracking. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We're valued patrons here. We contribute more to this place in a month than—" She stopped herself, but the implication had already landed. "Then you—" Nia felt the room inhale collectively. The manager looked trapped. He glanced toward the entrance, perhaps hoping Richard Hallstrom would arrive and restore order in his favor. Nia straightened in her chair. "Value," she said quietly, "is not measured by how much noise you can make without consequence." Elaine stared at her, stunned. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. The server nearby took a small step forward, emboldened by the shift in energy. This confrontation had crossed a line. What began as a cruel joke was now a public reckoning. Not loud, not violent, but unmistakable. Nia reached for her glass of water, took a small sip, and placed it back down with care. "I'm willing to accept a sincere apology," she said, "from both of you, and I'm willing to move on." Elaine laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "You think you're in a position to make demands?" Nia met her gaze steadily. "Yes," she said. The word echoed, quiet and firm. Elaine opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice from a nearby table spoke up. "I saw what happened." Heads turned. A man in a tailored suit stood slowly, his expression controlled but resolute. He looked at Nia, then at Elaine. "That wasn't an accident," he said, "and you know it." The balance of the room shifted again. Nia hadn't asked for allies, but truth had a way of surfacing once fear loosened its grip. Elaine's confidence wavered. The manager swallowed hard, Tyler's face flushed, embarrassment creeping in where arrogance once sat. And still, none of them knew who Nia Carter really was. They only knew that something had changed. The kind of change that couldn't be laughed away. And this was only the beginning. The man who had spoken stood firm, hands relaxed at his sides, not aggressive, just present. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. His certainty did the work for him. "I was watching," he continued. "Your son didn't trip, he didn't slip, he aimed." A murmur rippled through the dining room, not loud enough to be disruptive, but loud enough to be undeniable. The room had crossed a threshold. Silence was no longer unanimous. Elaine Hallstrom's face hardened. "This has nothing to do with you," she snapped. The man met her gaze calmly. "It does when someone is humiliated and everyone pretends it didn't happen." Tyler shifted in his chair, his earlier confidence draining fast. He glanced around, realizing for the first time that people were looking at him, not with admiration but judgment. That was new, uncomfortable, dangerous. The manager stepped forward again, voice tight. "Sir, ma'am, let's all lower our voices." Nia turned to him slowly. "No one here is raising their voice," she said. "What's being raised is the truth." That sentence landed with weight. The manager hesitated, caught between appeasing wealth and maintaining control. He glanced again toward the entrance, as if hoping rescue would arrive in the form of a powerful last name. It didn't. Instead, another voice joined in, soft but steady. "She's right," said a woman from 2 tables over. "We all saw it." A third voice followed. "This place has rules, doesn't it?" The illusion of isolation shattered. Nia felt the shift deep in her chest. Not triumph, not relief, validation. The kind that comes when reality finally reflects what you've been carrying alone. Elaine's composure cracked further. "Are you all serious right now?" she demanded. "This is absurd. We're being attacked over a joke." "A joke," Nia repeated, tasting the word. "Jokes don't require someone else's dignity as the punchline." Elaine turned to the manager sharply. "I want this handled now." The manager straightened, the pressure visible in his eyes. "Mrs. Hallstrom," he said carefully, "perhaps an apology would help de-escalate the situation." Elaine stared at him as if he'd betrayed her. "You want me to apologize?" "For what happened," he replied. Elaine laughed, but there was no humor left in it. "Absolutely not." That refusal was louder than any shout. Nia leaned back slightly in her chair. She didn't fold her arms, she didn't smile. She simply watched, letting Elaine reveal herself fully. "Then we're clear," Nia said. "Clear about what?" Elaine snapped. "About who you choose to be when no one is forcing decency on you," Nia replied. Tyler finally spoke, his voice sharper than before. "Why are you acting like you're better than us?" The question exposed more than he intended. Nia looked at him, not with anger, but with something closer to sadness. "I'm not acting better," she said. "I'm acting accountable. There's a difference." The boy scoffed, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He wasn't used to adults refusing to back down. He wasn't used to being corrected publicly. The shield his mother had always held in front of him was cracking, and he could feel the cold air seeping in. Elaine stepped closer to Nia's table now, lowering her voice, trying a different tactic. "Listen," she said, her tone suddenly smooth. "Let's not make this a whole thing. We can cover your meal, maybe send you a dessert. No harm done." There it was. The transactional solution. The assumption that money could convert humiliation into silence. Nia looked up at her. "You think this is about compensation?" Elaine hesitated. "Isn't it?" Nia shook her head slowly. "It's about respect, and you can't buy that after the fact." The manager swallowed hard. He could feel control slipping through his fingers. The restaurant's carefully curated atmosphere was unraveling, thread by thread. At that moment, the front doors opened. A tall man entered, dressed impeccably, his presence commanding without effort. Conversations faltered. Several heads turned in recognition. Richard Hallstrom had arrived. Elaine's posture shifted instantly, relief flooding her face. She turned toward him, voice sharp with indignation. "Richard, finally, this woman is causing a disturbance." Richard scanned the room, reading expressions quickly. He noticed the tension, the eyes watching the manager's stiff stance. His gaze landed on Nia, then on the stained tablecloth. "What happened?" he asked, his voice controlled. Before Elaine could respond, Tyler spoke. "It was nothing, she's just overreacting." Richard looked at his son, then back at Nia. Ma'am. Nia met his gaze evenly. Your son threw food at my table. Your wife laughed. When I asked for an apology, I was told to move. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at Elaine, whose expression had already hardened in defense. Is that true? He asked. Elaine scoffed. He was joking. She's making it racial, making it dramatic. The word racial dropped like a spark. The room went still. Nia felt the familiar burn of that accusation, the way it reframed accountability as aggression. She didn't flinch. Pointing out disrespect doesn't create division, she said. It reveals it. Richard studied her more closely now. He was a businessman. He recognized composure under pressure. He recognized when someone wasn't bluffing. He turned to the manager. Why hasn't this been resolved? The manager cleared his throat. Mrs. Hallstrom declined to apologize. Richard exhaled slowly. He looked back at Elaine. Elaine. She crossed her arms. I'm not apologizing to someone who's trying to embarrass us. Nia spoke before Richard could respond. I didn't embarrass you, she said. You did that yourself. A few diners nodded subtly. Others watched, rapt. Richard's eyes flicked around the room, taking in the shift in power. He realized something was wrong, not just socially, but strategically. Public perception mattered, and this was going badly. Elaine, he said again more firmly, say you're sorry. She stared at him, shocked. You can't be serious. I am, he replied. This isn't the hill to die on. The phrase hit hard. Elaine's face flushed. She looked at Nia, then at the people watching, then back at her husband. Her voice dropped. Fine, she said tightly. I'm sorry you were offended. Nia didn't respond right away. Richard watched her carefully. Will that suffice? He asked. Nia shook her head gently. No. Elaine's eyes widened. Excuse me. That wasn't an apology, Nia said. That was avoidance. Richard's patience thinned. What do you want? Nia met his gaze. I want your son to understand that what he did was wrong, and I want your wife to understand that laughing at humiliation is cruelty. Tyler bristled. This is ridiculous. Richard turned sharply to him. Enough. The boy fell silent. Richard looked back at Nia, studying her again. You're asking for a lesson, he said. I'm asking for accountability, Nia replied. Whether you choose to teach it is up to you. The words hung between them, heavy and unmistakable. Richard nodded once slowly. He turned to his son. Apologize. Tyler hesitated. The room watched. For the first time in his life, the choice wasn't protected. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he muttered. Look at her, Richard said. Tyler lifted his eyes reluctantly. I'm sorry for throwing the food, he said louder now. It was wrong. Nia nodded, acknowledging the effort. Richard turned to Elaine. Your turn. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. The laughter was gone now. The amusement evaporated. What remained was resentment and fear. I'm sorry, she said stiffly. That was inappropriate. Nia studied her carefully, then inclined her head slightly. Thank you. The manager exhaled in relief. The room loosened just a fraction. Richard turned to Nia. I apologize on behalf of my family, he said. This should never have happened. Nia met his gaze. Apologies matter most when they're followed by change. Richard nodded, though something unsettled him. There was a sense, an intuition, that this woman was not just another guest, that consequences might ripple beyond this room. As if on cue, a phone buzzed softly at a nearby table. Someone glanced down at their screen, then up at Nia, recognition flickering across their face. Another phone buzzed, then another. Whispers began again, but this time with a different energy. Is that? No way. That's her. Richard noticed, his eyes narrowed slightly. Nia reached for her napkin, dabbing the table calmly, as if nothing monumental was unfolding. The inciting moment had passed, but the story had only just turned. Because the room was beginning to understand who had been sitting quietly among them all along. And soon the Hallstroms would too. The room did not return to normal after the apologies. It pretended to, but the shift was permanent. Conversations resumed in fragments, quieter than before. Forks moved again, glasses lifted, but everyone was aware that something irreversible had happened. Not because voices were raised, but because a line had been crossed and then redrawn in front of witnesses. Nia felt it immediately. The air around her had changed. People were looking now, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with recognition trying to assemble itself. The kind that begins as doubt and sharpens into certainty. She had seen this moment before. In boardrooms, at conferences, at private events where power liked to believe it was among its own. The subtle pause, the recalculation. Richard Hallstrom noticed it too. He sat back down slowly, eyes scanning the room, instincts sharpening. He was a man who understood influence, who read environments the way sailors read currents. And right now, the current was pulling away from him. "Let's put this behind us," he said, attempting control through closure. "No need to let dinner turn into theater." Nia looked at him calmly. "This wasn't theater," she said. "It was exposure." Richard didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly. He wasn't offended. He was unsettled. Elaine sat stiff beside him, arms folded, eyes forward. Her silence was not peace, it was containment. Tyler stared at his plate, appetite gone, face flushed with something unfamiliar. Shame. The manager returned with a fresh tablecloth, his movements careful, almost reverent. As he replaced the stained linen, his hands shook slightly. "I apologize again, Ms." He stopped himself, realizing he didn't know her name. Nia met his eyes. "Carter," she said. "Nia Carter." The name landed quietly. 2 tables away, a man's eyes widened. Across the room, a woman straightened in her seat. Someone leaned toward their companion and whispered urgently. Richard noticed. "Carter," he repeated slowly, testing it. Nia nodded once. Richard felt the shift then, not social, not emotional, but professional. The kind that hits when a door opens in your mind and you realize you've underestimated the room. "Excuse me," he said, standing. "May I speak with you privately?" Nia didn't rise. "You may speak," she replied. "Privacy isn't necessary." That answer sent another ripple through the room. Richard paused, then sat back down, recalibrating. "I meant no disrespect," he said carefully, "and I want to make sure this ends well for everyone." Nia folded her hands on the table. "That depends on what ending well means to you." Elaine scoffed under her breath. "Unbelievable," she muttered. Nia turned her gaze to her, not sharply, not angrily, but fully. Elaine felt it like pressure. "You laughed," Nia said. "That matters more than the food." Elaine bristled. "You're dragging this out." "No," Nia replied. "I'm refusing to minimize it." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Can we just go?" he whispered to his father. Richard glanced at his son, then back at Nia. "What do you want?" he asked again, more softly now. Nia considered him. "I want you to understand that what happened tonight doesn't disappear because apologies were spoken. It lingers, in people, in places." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand accountability," he said. "I've built my life on it." Nia held his gaze. "Then you understand this isn't over." At a nearby table, the man who had first spoken up leaned toward his companion. "That's her," he whispered. "Carter Global." The whisper traveled. A woman across the room discreetly checked her phone, eyes widening as confirmation appeared. She looked up at Nia with something close to awe. Richard noticed the glances now, the way attention gravitated subtly toward Nia's table, the way staff moved more cautiously, the way conversations bent around her presence. "Elaine," he murmured, "do you know who this is?" Elaine frowned. "Of course not." Richard hesitated. "Nia Carter is the CEO of Carter Global Holdings." Elaine's breath caught. Tyler looked up sharply. "The tech company." Nia didn't react. She didn't confirm or deny. She let the truth move at its own pace. Richard swallowed. He knew the name. Everyone in his world did. Carter Global was finalizing an acquisition that had rattled markets, an acquisition that touched companies adjacent to his own. "Why didn't you say anything?" Elaine blurted, her voice sharp with panic. Nia's eyes didn't leave hers, because respect shouldn't depend on resume. The words hit Elaine like a slap. Richard leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This is unfortunate," he said. "For you," Nia replied. Silence settled again, heavier now. The manager approached once more, voice deferential. "Ms. Carter, please allow us to offer." Nia raised a hand gently. "I don't want compensation," she said. "I want awareness." Richard watched her closely. "And what does awareness cost?" he asked. Nia met his gaze. "Discomfort," she said, "and honesty." Elaine shook her head, disbelief flooding her face. "You're enjoying this," she accused. Nia's expression hardened for the first time. "No," she said, "I'm enduring it." That distinction landed. Tyler stared at Nia now, seeing her differently. Not as a target, not as a stranger, but as someone who had stood her ground when everyone expected her to retreat. "I didn't mean it," he said quietly. Nia looked at him. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she replied, "but accountability can change outcomes." Richard nodded slowly. "What happens next?" he asked. Nia glanced around the room, at the staff, the diners, the witnesses. "What happens next," she said, "is that this place remembers tonight, and so do you." Elaine's voice trembled. "Are you going to ruin us?" Nia met her gaze steadily. "I didn't throw anything," she said. "I didn't laugh, I didn't deflect. Whatever happens from here forward will be the result of choices already made." The weight of that settled over the table. Phones buzzed again, messages spread quietly, names connected, stories aligned. Richard understood then that the power dynamic had shifted, not violently, not dramatically, but irrevocably. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning in slow motion. And it was far from finished. The tension did not break when recognition spread. It deepened. People did not relax once the name was known. They leaned in, instinctively aware that truth carries gravity, and gravity pulls everything closer. Nia felt it settle across the room like a second ceiling, invisible but undeniable. Richard Hallstrom cleared his throat, a habit he used when recalculating strategy. He glanced at his wife, then his son, then back at Nia, measuring not just the moment but its consequences. He understood markets, leverage, reputation. He understood how quickly narratives hardened. "Let us be practical," Richard said, lowering his voice. "This doesn't have to escalate." Nia met his gaze evenly. "Escalation happens when accountability is avoided," she replied. "Tonight moved forward because it was." Elaine's composure frayed. "You could have said who you were," she snapped. "You let this happen." Nia didn't flinch. "I didn't create disrespect," she said. "I refused to cushion it." That distinction lingered. Around them, diners shifted in their seats, now fully invested. Some felt vindicated for having spoken. Others felt exposed for having stayed silent. Everyone felt implicated. The manager hovered nearby, no longer hiding his concern. "Ms. Carter," he said, "we value your presence here." Nia looked at him. "Value is demonstrated," she replied, "not declared after harm." Richard exhaled slowly. "What would demonstration look like to you?" he asked. Nia considered the question carefully. "It would look like policy," she said. "Training, clear expectations, consequences that don't bend for names." Elaine laughed sharply. "You think one dinner gives you authority over how places operate?" Nia turned to her. "No," she said, "leadership does." The word leadership echoed, stirring recognition. Several diners nodded subtly. Someone nearby whispered, "She's right." Tyler stared at the table, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. For the first time, the night had stripped him of spectatorship. He was no longer watching adults argue, he was the subject. "I messed up," he said quietly. Elaine turned toward him, startled. "Tyler." He looked up at his mother, voice steadier than before. "I did. I thought it would be funny. It was." The admission cut through the tension like a clean blade. Not dramatic, not loud. Honest. Nia regarded him thoughtfully. "Owning harm is the first step," she said. "It's not the last." Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We'll talk about this later," he said. "Talk isn't enough," Nia replied. "Correction matters." Elaine stiffened. "You don't get to parent our child." Nia met her gaze. "I'm not," she said. "I'm showing him what accountability looks like when adults fail to." The room went still again, absorbing the truth. Elaine looked around, realizing the audience was no longer on her side. She had mistaken privilege for consensus. A woman from another table stood. "My daughter works here," she said. "I want her to know this place protects her dignity." Heads turned, another diner nodded. "Mine too." The manager swallowed hard. "We will review our procedures," he said quickly. "Review is not reform," Nia replied, "but it's a start." Richard leaned back, rubbing his temples. He saw the trajectory now. This was not a viral scandal. It was worse. It was structural scrutiny. "Ms. Carter," he said, "my companies value partnership. We prefer resolution." Nia tilted her head slightly. "Resolution begins with reflection," she said. "Ask yourself why your first instinct was to control the outcome instead of correcting the behavior." Richard paused. He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Elaine's voice cracked. "Are you enjoying watching us squirm?" Nia's tone softened, but not her stance. "No," she said. "I'm tired of watching people mistake discomfort for persecution." That line landed with force. It reframed the moment entirely. Tyler stood suddenly, chairs scraped softly nearby. "I want to apologize again," he said, louder now. "To you and to everyone here, I was wrong." The room reacted, not with applause but with attention, real attention. Nia nodded once. "Thank you," she said. "Now remember this feeling the next time power tempts you." Richard studied her, something like respect forming. "You didn't threaten us," he said. "You didn't demand anything." "I demanded standards," Nia replied. "That's different." Phones continued to buzz, but the energy had shifted. The story spreading now wasn't outrage, it was integrity. The manager approached again, posture straighter. "Ms. Carter, we will put our commitment in writing," he said, "and we'll address staff training immediately." Nia met his eyes. "Follow through," she said. "People are watching." Richard rose. "We should leave," he said quietly to his family. Elaine hesitated, then stood, her expression unreadable. Tyler lingered, then looked back at Nia. "I won't forget this," he said. "Make sure you don't," Nia replied gently. As the Hallstroms walked toward the exit, conversations resumed, but differently. Softer, thoughtful, charged with awareness. Nia remained seated, alone again, but no longer isolated. She felt the weight lift slightly, replaced by something steadier. Truth had done its work, and the consequences were just beginning. Nia took a slow breath as the doors closed behind the family. The sound was subtle but symbolic. It marked the end of one illusion and the start of another responsibility. She could feel the room recalibrating around her, not elevating her, but aligning itself with a clearer sense of right and wrong. A server approached, eyes earnest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying something." Nia nodded. "Thank you for listening." That exchange mattered more than any apology. It acknowledged the unseen labor of dignity that workers carried every day. Across the room, a man rose and caught Nia's attention. "I work in compliance," he said quietly. "What you did tonight will ripple." "I hope it does," Nia replied. "Ripple, not explode." He smiled faintly and returned to his seat. The manager gathered his team near the host's stand, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Nia noticed the change in posture, the seriousness replacing the earlier hesitation. This was what accountability looked like at ground level: uncomfortable, necessary, formative. Nia glanced at her phone for the first time that evening. Messages had stacked up, colleagues asking if she was okay, partners mentioning they'd heard something happened. She typed a brief reply and set it aside. Tonight wasn't about managing perception. It was about letting truth stand on its own. At a nearby table, the first man who had spoken up met her eyes and nodded. There was gratitude there and relief, the relief of knowing silence had not won. Nia finished her water and placed the glass down with care. She felt tired but not drained. The fatigue was clean, earned, the kind that follows integrity rather than compromise. A couple approached hesitantly. "We just wanted to say," the woman began, "what you did took courage." Nia offered a small smile. "Courage multiplies when shared," she said. They thanked her and walked away. The manager returned once more, holding a card. "If you're willing," he said, "I'd like to follow up." Nia accepted the card. "I'm willing," she replied, "so long as this isn't performative." "It won't be," he said, and meant it. As minutes passed, the room settled into a new normal. Not erased, not healed, but honest. People spoke more softly. Laughter sounded different, considered. Nia gathered her things and stood. Several heads turned instinctively. She felt the attention but did not feed it. At the door, she paused and looked back once. The staff moved with purpose. The diners watched with awareness. The space remembered. She stepped outside into the cool night air and let her shoulders drop. The city hummed, indifferent and alive. Nia walked away knowing that truth had weight, and when carried without cruelty, it could change rooms, policies, and people. The rising action continued, not in noise but in resolve. As she walked down the sidewalk, Nia replayed the evening with clarity rather than regret. She knew the pattern well. Moments like this rarely ended cleanly. There would be emails, meetings, statements crafted to sound earnest. Some would mean it, some would not. Her role was not to police intentions, but to insist on outcomes. She stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change, and considered the boy's face when he apologized. The crack in certainty, the first encounter with consequence, that mattered. Even if it took years to surface again, it would be there waiting. Back inside, the restaurant would tell the story in fragments. Who said what? Who stood up? Who froze? Memory would sharpen around the truth and blur around the excuses. That, too, was accountability. Nia crossed the street and blended into the crowd. No escort, no announcement, just a woman moving forward with her values intact. Tomorrow would bring negotiations and numbers, but tonight had delivered something rarer: alignment between power and principle. The truth was heavy, but it had been carried. And it was still moving. Across town, phones continued to light up with retellings. Not outrage, not spectacle, but reflection. People asked each other what they would have done, what they should do next time. The question itself was progress. Nia hailed a ride and settled into the back seat, watching the city pass. She allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, not for winning anything, but for not surrendering herself. She had not needed to reveal her title to deserve respect. She had not needed to threaten to be heard. That lesson would linger in the room she left behind. As the car pulled away, she closed her eyes briefly and breathed. Tomorrow the work would continue. Tonight the truth had spoken, and it would not be unsaid. The rising action pressed forward, steady and deliberate, carried by people who had witnessed what dignity looks like when it refuses to bend. Not every change announces itself. Some arrive quietly, demanding patience. Nia trusted that kind. She had built her life on it. The light turned green. The city moved. And somewhere behind her, a room remembered how truth feels when it finally has space. It would matter later. It always did. Change was already underway, quiet, persistent, and impossible to fully reverse. The weight of truth kept moving forward, unchanged. Without permission or apology. The consequences did not arrive with noise. They arrived with gravity. By morning, the story had escaped the walls of the restaurant, not through outrage but through recognition. People weren't sharing it because it was dramatic. They were sharing it because it was unsettling, because it forced a question no one could easily dismiss. What would you have done if you were there? Nia sat in her office as sunlight filtered through the glass walls, her city stretching beneath her like a living system she helped shape but did not control. Her phone buzzed steadily, not with panic, not with praise, but with awareness. Board members, legal advisors, partners, all asking the same thing in different words. Are you okay? Do you want to address this? How far do you want to take it? She answered none of them immediately. Because the climax of this story was never about exposure. It was about choice. Across town, Richard Hallstrom stared at his reflection in his office window, the city behind him feeling suddenly unfamiliar. His assistant stood nearby, holding a tablet with headlines that avoided sensational language but cut deeper for it. Industry leaders react to restaurant incident. Questions raised about accountability and culture. Nothing accused him directly, nothing needed to. Elaine sat rigid on the leather couch, arms crossed, eyes burning. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We apologized, it should be over. Richard didn't turn around. It's not about the apology, he said quietly. It's about what it revealed. Tyler stood near the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, silent. He had tried to return to school that morning and failed. The looks were different now, not cruel, curious, expectant. You embarrassed us, Elaine said, her voice sharp. You both did. Tyler flinched. I embarrassed myself. Elaine turned on him. You think siding with her makes this better? It makes it honest, he replied. That word again. Honest. Richard finally turned, eyes tired. Enough, he said. This isn't about blame anymore, it's about response. Elaine laughed bitterly. And what response do you think she wants? A public apology, a donation, control over our lives. Richard shook his head slowly. She wants accountability that doesn't ask permission. At that moment, Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stiffened. Put it on speaker, Elaine demanded. He didn't. I'll take this, he said, stepping into his private office. The call was brief, clinical, final. When he returned, something in his posture had changed. Our pending merger is on hold, he said. Elaine's breath caught. Because of her. Because of us, Richard corrected. Because culture matters now, because people are watching. Elaine sank back, stunned. Tyler stared at his father, fear and understanding colliding. Across the city, Nia stood before her board, not defensive, not triumphant, honest. I'm not asking for retaliation, she said. I'm asking for standards. One director leaned forward. This could get messy. It already is, Nia replied. The question is whether we clean it or hide it. Silence followed, then nods. Back at Hallstrom Industries, Richard made a decision he had delayed for years. He called a press conference, not to deny, not to deflect. To confront. Cameras lined the room. Reporters waited, pens ready. Elaine stood backstage, furious. This is a mistake, she hissed. You're giving her power. Richard met her gaze. No, he said, I'm admitting we abused it. He stepped onto the stage. What happened at the restaurant, he began, was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom. The room stilled. We failed to correct behavior because we assumed status excused it. That assumption ends now. Elaine watched in disbelief. Tyler watched in awe. We are implementing mandatory accountability training across all our companies, Richard continued. Not as damage control, but as correction. A reporter raised a hand. Is this because of Ms. Carter? Richard nodded. Yes, because she refused to let disrespect hide behind comfort. Across town, Nia watched the broadcast in silence. Then she stood. She didn't release a statement. She didn't celebrate. She sent one email. Follow through matters. I'll be watching. Richard received it minutes later. He closed his eyes. That was the moment. Not when the apology was spoken. Not when the name was revealed. But when power chose humility over pride. Elaine confronted Tyler that night. You cost us everything, she said. Tyler shook his head. No, he replied. I showed us who we were. She slapped the table. You don't understand the world. I'm starting to, he said quietly. That was the second climax. The private one. Weeks later, Nia returned to the restaurant. Not announced, not expected. The staff froze when they saw her, then relaxed. The manager approached, eyes steady. We've changed, he said. Not because we had to, because we should have. Nia nodded. That's the difference. She sat at the same table, clean, untouched. Outside, a protest wasn't forming. No chants, no signs. Inside, something stronger had taken root. Memory. Richard stood in his office days later, reviewing new policies, new language, new leadership structures. They cost money. They cost comfort. They were worth it. Elaine retreated from public life, bitterness consuming her pride. Tyler volunteered at a youth center, not to be seen, but to learn. He listened more than he spoke. And Nia. She walked through her world unchanged in posture, but expanded in impact. Not because she had one, but because she had stood. The climax was complete not when someone fell, but when systems bent. Justice didn't shout. It didn't punish for spectacle. It corrected course. And everyone felt it. Exactly as it should. The world did not stop after the truth surfaced. It adjusted. Weeks passed, and the initial tension dissolved into something quieter but far more lasting. Headlines moved on, cycles shifted, new controversies took their place. But underneath that surface motion, something had been altered in ways that could not be easily undone. Nia felt it first in small moments. Meetings began differently. People listened without interrupting. Questions carried more intention. When she spoke about culture, about responsibility, about dignity, there was less nodding for appearance and more engagement that carried weight. She noticed it in how her team showed up. Younger executives spoke with more confidence. Staff members challenged assumptions without fear. Silence was no longer mistaken for professionalism. It was understood as a choice, not an obligation. That was the kind of resolution Nia believed in. Not applause, not victory laps, but shifts that stayed after the room emptied. At Carter Global, new internal guidelines were adopted, not branded as a response to an incident, but framed as alignment with values the company claimed to hold. Training wasn't outsourced to consultants who read slides. It was led by people who understood power from the inside and harm from experience. Nia insisted on that. Accountability can't be cosmetic, she told her board. If it doesn't make us uncomfortable, it isn't working. They listened. Across town, Hallstrom Industries was changing too, though not without friction. Some executives resisted the new mandates, muttering about optics and overcorrection. Others welcomed the clarity. Richard watched carefully, understanding now that leadership wasn't about maintaining comfort. It was about choosing direction and absorbing the backlash when necessary. He lost some allies, he gained something steadier. Elaine withdrew from the social circuit she once dominated. Invitations stopped coming, not because of scandal, but because people sensed she no longer represented the values they wanted associated with their names. She told herself she didn't care, but she did. At home, the silence between her and Tyler stretched, then softened, then reshaped. He no longer flinched when she spoke. He no longer waited for approval to think. That unsettled her more than any public criticism. Tyler kept volunteering, not posting about it, not telling friends. He showed up early and stayed late, listening to kids who reminded him of himself in ways he didn't like. It wasn't redemption, it was education. Richard noticed the change in his son before he named it. One evening he asked quietly, "What did you learn?" Tyler thought for a long moment. "That laughing is easy," he said, "and standing still is hard." Richard nodded. That answer mattered. The restaurant continued operating, but it did so with a different awareness. Staff intervened sooner. Managers acted decisively. Guests noticed. Some complained. Others stayed because they felt safer, more respected. Revenue dipped briefly, then stabilized, then grew. Dignity, it turned out, was good for business. One night, a young server approached Nia after her second visit. "I spoke up today," she said, voice trembling. "I never would have before." Nia smiled. "That's how change works," she replied, quietly until it doesn't need to be. Nia herself did not become a symbol. She avoided interviews that framed her as heroic. She declined invitations that sought spectacle. She understood how easily narratives could distort intention. She preferred consistency. Her mother called one evening, having heard pieces of the story through community whispers. "You okay?" she asked. "I am," Nia replied. There was a pause, then her mother said, "I'm proud of how you stood." Nia closed her eyes briefly. That was enough. Months later, at an industry conference, Nia crossed paths with Richard. No cameras, no audience. "I wanted to thank you," he said. Nia met his gaze. "For what?" "For not making it about destruction," he replied. "You could have." "I wasn't interested in punishment," she said. "I was interested in alignment." Richard nodded. "You changed how I lead." "That's on you," Nia replied. "Change only sticks when people choose it." They parted without ceremony. The boy who once threw food barely recognized the version of himself that had done it. The woman who laughed never fully understood what she lost. The room that stayed silent learned how heavy silence could be. And Nia. She kept moving. The resolution was not perfect. Some wounds lingered. Some people learned slowly. Some never did. But the trajectory had shifted, and that mattered more than closure. Justice, Nia believed, was not a moment. It was a practice. And dignity was not something granted by others. It was something you carried, even when the world tested whether you deserved to keep it. That night in the restaurant became a reference point, not because it was dramatic, but because it was instructive. People remembered how easily cruelty disguised itself as humor, how quickly systems protected the wrong things, how one calm refusal had altered the flow of a room. Years later, someone would tell the story differently, simplifying it, sharpening edges. But those who were there would remember the truth. No shouting, no threats, no spectacle, just a woman who stayed seated and demanded respect. That was the resolution. Not an ending, but a recalibration. And it endured. This story was never about food thrown across a table. It was about power thrown around without thought. It was about how easily cruelty hides behind laughter, how quickly privilege assumes immunity, and how often silence is mistaken for agreement. It was about the quiet pressure placed on those who are expected to endure disrespect gracefully, simply because speaking up makes others uncomfortable. Nia didn't change the night by raising her voice. She changed it by refusing to shrink. Her strength wasn't in exposure or revenge. It was in clarity, in naming what happened without rage, in demanding accountability without cruelty, in understanding that dignity doesn't need volume, it needs conviction. The lesson is simple but not easy. Respect should never depend on titles, wealth, or reputation. Apologies without ownership are empty. And power, when left unchecked, reveals who we really are. This story reminds us that real justice isn't about humiliation, it's about correction. Not about tearing people down, but about forcing systems and individuals to confront the truth they've been avoiding. Growth begins where excuses end. And for those watching silently, this story asks something too. Who do you protect when you say nothing? What behavior do you excuse because it's easier than intervening? And what kind of world are we quietly agreeing to when we choose comfort over courage? Change doesn't always arrive with protests or headlines. Sometimes it walks in calmly, takes a seat, and refuses to move until dignity is acknowledged. That kind of change lasts. So the next time you witness disrespect dressed up as humor, the next time power laughs and expects no consequences, remember this story. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stays seated and waits for the truth to catch up. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes silence is neutral. And respect is optional,